Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to take place in the 26th chapter in the book of Job. This launches or unleashes Job's ninth and final speech as measured by a monologue the next time we hear from him after the 31st chapter. So this is the longest speech of Job. It's his ninth and final. Him and his three comforters are stuck in a stalemate in their debate, and the book of Job asks the question of a theodicy, that is the genre which asks the questions pertaining to the relationship of suffering and the righteous. Why do bad things happen to good people? And Job sort of flips the script, approaches the same question with a different emphasis. Why is there no immediate retribution for the wicked? So why do good things happen to bad people, and why do bad things happen to good people? This is the world that we must find ourselves living in, and we have no choice but to adapt. And Job catalogs the sins of the country, the sins of the farmland, and the sins of the city in the first 17 verses. So wherever you are in human history, there is exploitation, there is oppression, there are common cycles of sin which keeps the world in motion. And of course there's oppression and corruption, and because it's a fallen world, it's a corrupt and perverted world, and this thing makes faith necessary. But in the lesson we most recently covered, we did it from the range of the 18th verse of the 24th chapter to the 6th and final verse of the 25th chapter. It's a short chapter, so we're going to transition from Job's 8th speech to Bildad the Shuhite's 3rd and final one. And the next person we hear from after Job is Elihu. Then we finally hear from Yahweh himself. So Job, after noting the observations that the wicked run the world, they get away with it. These are common cycles in the course of human interactions, just these exploitations that go on in the country and in the city. He appears to adopt a sarcastic tone where he appears to mimic or at least reference the frame of argument of his debate antagonist, and he says, "The womb forgets him, the worm feeds sweetly on him, he is remembered no more, and wickedness is broken like a tree." This is how it ought to be, and this is how it ultimately must be for the wicked. But Job's question is his longing is for the immediate retribution. Why do sinful people keep inflicting suffering and suffering on suffering and getting away with it and profiting and pilfering at the expense of other humans? But the fact is that they can get away with it, and they do get away with it, means that wickedness does pay price. It does yield a dividends occasionally. Ultimately, wickedness does not pay, but the temptation and the allure is the short-term satisfaction that it offers. Verse 23, he reverts back to a soberer state of mind. These are more aligned with his words and his thoughts, his observations. He gives him safety, and he leans on it, yet his eyes are on their ways. So the wicked, the rulers and the powers of the world are there by the sovereign providence of the Almighty. So these wicked people who rule entire nations, they are made prosperous in spite of themselves, yet they are being watched, and if you have prosperity, then you will be watched how you handle it. There is a fair weather faith, there is a foul weather faith. The temptation and the challenge and the difficulty of coming across prosperity is the temptation to have mammon cease, to have mammon become your god. Yet they are lifted up for a little while, then they are gone, and then shall be brought low. Like all, they are gathered up, and they are cut off like the heads of grain. So the wicked, there is pleasure in sin for a season. You can get away with it for a little while, but the ultimate pain, the price, and the dividend of the investment of wickedness does not end well. Once you exalt yourself on the earth, you will be debased and humiliated in the afterlife, and you will not escape the judgment or the consequences of the judgment, which is hellfire. Job speaks of 3 places of death in the 26th chapter we're going to cover today. Now we're just going to briefly review Bildad the Shuhite. He gives a brief, poetic, dense descriptions, a lot of good stuff in here. The first 3 verses pertain to the Almighty's power, and the final 3 verses pertain to his purity. And Job ultimately inspires rival doxology because he's in a debate. So there's this fascinating character reaction of one-upsmanship between Job and his antagonist. They say one thing, Job tries to out-eloquent them, outwit them in his testimonies. We'll hear what Bildad says. Rule and reverence belong to him, making peace in his high places. Is there any number to his armies, and on whom does his light not rise? He is sovereign, he is omnipotent, he is the one who wages war and makes peace, and the angels at his disposal are innumerable, and his power is infinite, and he is omnipresent. There is nothing that escapes his notice, escapes his attention. He's also omniscient, so that's what light means, the all-seeing, all-knowing eye in the sky. Nothing escapes him, so you can go to heaven, and you can go to Sheol, David says in the 139th Psalm. That's one of the terms that we encounter in the 26th chapter. Next, he speaks of his purity and the attendant lack thereof of humanity in the presence, in the proximity of one who is so pure. So how could man be righteous before El, or how could he be flawless who is born of a woman? Any and all who are born of a woman inherit the sin nature without which we could have never been conceived. So if they did not eat the apple, Adam and Eve, we would not be here. So we are sinners by birth, sinners by nature, and not necessarily by choice. Certainly, that's true for the born-again Christian, but the fact is that none of us can be righteous before Elohim, because on our best day, our best works are likened to filthy rags before him who's without blemish, by the prophet Isaiah in the 64th chapter, the 6th verse of the book which bears his name. So to even declare yourself, to even think yourself righteous enough to stand and merit his approval, and that he could somehow be awed or impressed by your right standing with him through your own works, is the height of hubris. And then verse 5, he just weighs his luminosity, his radiance, as greater than the heavenly bodies, the stars, which a lot of the ancient Near Easterns were prone to worship, but the Hebrews and Job and his companions were not Hebrews by blood, but they were by a beast. How much less man, a maggot, and a son of man, a worm? So compared to the stars, we are insignificant, we are dwarfs, yet the one who made us, the crown achievement of his creation, we are of greater estimation and value than all the planets and all the stars and all the galaxies. But in spite of that, we are qualitatively insignificant to the heavenly bodies, and we are likened to a maggot and a worm. This is the lowest of the low. So much in the same way that we think of maggots and worms as these inferior life forms, these degraded creatures, so too are we in the assessment and the evaluation of the all-seeing, all-knowing eye in the sky. 26th chapter, first verse, lesson itself. And Job answered and said, how have you helped the powerless, saved an arm not strong? So he's conceding to his argument. He gets what he's saying. He's in agreement with it. But what is the point and what is the purpose of your doxology but to toot your own horn and to give lip service religion? Here am I am powerless. I am bereft of any resources, help, hope, or future. And I am not strong, and you are adding insult to injury to the unprecedented calamity that hit me in the twinkling of an eye. So these three friends are identified as comforters in the 11th verse in the 2nd chapter. That title is somewhat misleading. They do not offer comfort. They do not offer counsel that is helpful, that is inspiring, that is true, that is kind, that is necessary. They all approach the debate from the vantage point that he had to sin because suffering without sin is unfathomable to their fairy tale theology. How have you given counsel to the unwise, or declared sound advice to many? So Job and his three friends, they had reputations for wisdom, and, the three friends of his certainly fancied themselves expositories of wisdom, and much of what they say is wise, but we have the hindsight, and we know certain things that they do not, which makes it tempting to sneer at their wisdom, because most of us clearly they are wiser than the average reader of the Bible, yet the one who's familiar with the New Covenant and its stipulations knows certain things. These men didn't even have the book of Genesis. Job is the patriarchal era earliest writing. Whoever wrote it before Moses did. But he's saying, where is put your money where your mouth is. I see your mouth, I see them talking, but where are you when it matters most? Job was not exactly unwise, but he could have used a word of wisdom that was actually helpful, actually beneficial, actually improved or bettered his situation from the men he once considered his friends, who are not acting very friendly. With whom have you spoken words, and whose spirit came from you? The spirit is the sign and the seal of an authentic message. Both Eliphaz the Temanite claimed to be visited by a spirit and to deduce a revelation about the fate of the wicked in the 4th chapter. I think Bildad's somewhere in the 8th chapter. In Job, somewhere claims to speak by a spirit. Now, a spirit is not necessarily a spirit itself is a force or entity, is morally neutral. It can be angelic or it can be demonic. So there is a gray area of ambiguity pertaining to the spirits through which these men speak and claim revelation. And it's perhaps an oversimplification, but the simplest way I've discovered to discern the difference between the divine and the demonic promptings is that the Ruach Kadesh most frequently speaks to me in the gentle voice of a whisper, whereas the demonic forces often stimulate an emotional excitement in me. So whenever I get wrapped up and think something's such a great idea, that's when I find myself taking a few steps back. Of course, this is an oversimplification. We've all been visited by the Spirit, which was just saturated our whole beings, and it was a physical, emotional experience. The Spirit is not a lifeless being. He, in fact, stimulates excitement and awareness and intensity in people, but most often he speaks to me in the gentle voice of the Spirit, which produces a conviction of conscience, which is as clear as any voice to me. The dead weight, those under the waters and those inhabiting them. Under the water, now the earth, it has a nucleus and layers and tiers within the continents. We only live on the surface. Underneath is some depth, the sea. There is more. We know more about outer space than we have probed even into our own sea, I believe. So, but underneath the water and the bottom, where water has a definitive bottom, so what lays underneath there, what lurks underneath there, was, the ancients thought, the world of the dead, and that is where you went when you died. So humanity remained immortal, but still earthbound, so that there was no sense of heaven in this world. This is not exactly hell. There are 3 layers of the afterlife that Job addresses. This is the first one. The grave is naked before him, and destruction has no covering. The grave is translated as the Hebrew term of Sheol. This would have been the place of eternal torment. This would have been distinct from the world of the dead. This was the world of the dead for the wicked. So there is a distinction and a gradation. And they are there because they are naked. You can conceal your sin from yourself. You can conceal your sin from others, but you cannot conceal your sin from the all-seeing, all-knowing, omnipresent, omniscient one who sees all, knows all, and you are as naked before you. So the quality of your character is going to be instantly and totally discerned in his presence, and he knew our elect standing before the foundation of the earth. Destruction, I believe that term, the place of destruction in the Hebrew language was Abaddon, and there would be no covering, no the blood of the Messiah covers us from the consequences of our sin, which is hell, the place of destruction and damnation and torment and outer darkness. He stretched out the north over emptiness, hanging the earth upon naught. This is an abrupt literary transition where Job speaks of the majesty and the might of the Almighty, and this is in response to Bildad having waxed poetic. Job is engaged in a debate trick of one-upsmanship, or a debate strategy of one-upping, that is to say something wittier, something more profound, something more eloquently than your debate counterpart did. That's what he's doing here. He's resting his case for his power on his creative prowess to stretch out the skies and the heavens and everything in beneath them and hold it all in one panoramic view, and to keep it all in motion requires an omnipotent being. That's the attribute of infinite or unlimited strength. And how does the earth hang? The ancients had no conception of gravity, but we do spin in motion, but we are hanging in space. We are not falling from space. The motions and mechanics of the galaxies upon galaxies are infinitely more intricate than I'm even qualified to offer any expert opinion on. But for the sake of argument, the Earth does hang through the laws of physics around the sun, and it does not free fall or just drop. It is in motion, in stable motion, yet in constant movement within that stable motion. Binding up waters in his thick clouds, and the cloud is not torn under them. The elements of the sky, the elements of water are his to control. He created them, he controls them, he commands them. He manifested in the form of a thick cloud to lead the wilderness wandering Exodus generation. So that form of, and clouds are often interpreted as omens of judgment, not only by the Hebrews, but the ancient Near East, and his majesty and superiority over the water. Now, many of the ancient Near Easterns worshipped mythical water beasts, but Job establishes Yahweh's supremacy and superiority over them. He draws a limit on the surface of the waters, and at the boundary of light in darkness. Every ounce of water in the ocean is controlled because it is contained, and he sets the boundaries. He declares where the earth and the sea begin and separate, and he has the right and prerogative to do that. So he declares how tall the waters can be. They're always at sea level, which is a perfect motion across the earth, and but that's all a part of an intelligent design of a wise, omniscient architect. And he not only does that with the water, but also the light and the darkness. So darkness is not a force or entity in itself. The only positive force in the universe is light. Darkness is better understood, perhaps, as the absence of light. But the darkness, I believe well, I'm not quite sure. Yeah, 13th verse. We'll take it back to Genesis 2. 1-2. The columns of the heavens tremble and are stunned at his reproof. The heavens are held by invisible columns. These are no physical columns. This is just likening the vast infinitude of space to a physical structure, an earthly structure that would have been upheld by columns, architectural ingredients to keep a building intact and keep it tall and keep it in place. So too are the heavens stretched out by his hand and his majesty and in his might. And these very physical forces, these seemingly exceedingly physically powerful forces, all tremble before him who is invisible and immaterial. He has the whole world in his hands and the universe too. In the beginning, he created the heaven and earth, and he has retained control and command in all ages since. And he does him disciplining the outer galactic movements or the waves of the sea is a form of reproof from his vantage point. By his power he has calmed the sea, and by his understanding he struck down Rahab. Rahab is to be distinguished from the Gentile prostitute in the 2nd chapter of the book of Joshua, the one who was a traitor to the Jericho people but earned her place in the Hebrew history, and in the Hebrew she's in fact listed as one of the ancestors of the Messiah. But this is a Canaanite sea beast, and Job's not exactly endorsing his existence. He's just using him as the foundation of a contrast between the omnipotent power and the limited power of these imaginary deities that were subscribed to. So Yahweh is supreme over the sea. There is no mythical beast in there that can overpower him or overwhelm him. This Rahab, even if it did exist and the powers that were ascribed to it did exist, it would be as nothing before Yahweh. By his spirit he adorned the heavens. His hand whirled the fleeing serpent. Fleeing serpent is an allusion to Leviathan, who is mentioned in the 8th verse of Job's 3rd chapter, also twice in the 41st chapter in Isaiah 21. This is the mythical sea beast that was perhaps greater than Rahab. I'm not entirely sure the Near Eastern origins of this, but Job, again, is not, he's using the nomenclature and the vernacular of his time, so much of these polytheistic vocabularies words would have been in his vocabulary, and he's not endorsing their existence. He's just using them to demonstrate their abject inferiority to El Shaddai, the Almighty, whose spirit was a creative force which not only made the world and the heavens, but made it all beautiful. The claim that any human can rival God as an artist is the height of arrogance. There is a lot of beauty in the universe that we don't even know about, that we can't even see, and there's so much beauty in the world. We do get glimpses of it, and we are grateful for it, but, the best, it really lays ahead for us. See, these are the fringes of his ways, and how a little matter is heard of him, and who understands the thunder of his power. So he does not claim an exhaustive knowledge of El Shaddai. In fact, much of the mystery, he does not doubt his power. He's only perplexed by his seemingly lack of justice for inflicting this devastation and ruin on his righteous servant, who is blameless and upright and everything else. But he's just describing what he knows, what he's seen, what he's observed. He's not saying these are his ways. He says these are on the fringes or the outskirts of his ways. He is, his efforts and attentions are everywhere all at once. But, he doesn't speak to us as often as a lot of us would like. That would supplement a lot of the faith of some people, because they don't hear a voice from him. They do not have a prompting. They do not have a conscience. They do not have a relationship with divinity. But even those of who we do, we can never fully fathom or understand or exhaust our knowledge in this mortal life, and we have an entire eternity to learn things of that which we do not know now that awaits us if we are fortunate enough to get there. But if you do not value the things and treasures of heaven while you are on earth, then you're going to be out of place in heaven, and you're going to be sent to the outer darkness, and that's where we don't want to go. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.